Have you ever wondered why some people repeat the same mistakes over and over again, while others are constantly evolving? Socrates, one of the greatest philosophers of all time, identified exactly two statements that clearly reveal human foolishness. And believe me, you've probably heard these words today. Maybe you've even said one of them yourself. But stay until the end, because the final revelation I'm about to share has the power to completely transform the way you see the world and your own choices. This truth is so profound that Socrates was condemned to death for teaching it. Yes, he chose death rather than renounce this wisdom. Before we dive into this transformative journey, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. You're about to discover insights that can radically change your perspective on life. And this is only the beginning. Socrates walked the streets of Athens more than 2,400 years ago, yet his words still echo with astonishing power today. He wrote no books, accumulated no material wealth, and built no monuments in his own name. His sole mission was to awaken people from the illusion of false knowledge. To do that, he developed a revolutionary method that exposed ignorance disguised as wisdom. The Socratic method, as it became known, consisted of asking seemingly simple questions that revealed contradictions in people's thinking. Imagine the scene. Athens, the heart of Western civilization, filled with politicians, merchants, and sophists selling knowledge, all convinced they deeply understood justice, virtue, courage, and wisdom. Then Socrates appears, a man of simple appearance, barefoot, dressed modestly, approaching these influential figures and asking basic questions. "What is justice?" he would ask. The person would begin explaining confidently, using sophisticated language and seemingly profound concepts. But then Socrates would ask another question, and then another, until the person realized that in truth they knew nothing about the subject they claimed to master. This process was uncomfortable, even humiliating for many, but it was necessary, because only when we recognize our ignorance can we begin to seek true knowledge. And this is exactly where we arrive at the two fatal statements that, according to Socrates, reveal a foolish person. The first statement is, "I already know everything about this." When someone says these words, they are closing the door to learning. They are declaring that their mind is complete, that there is no room left for growth, correction, or evolution. Socrates observed that the most ignorant people were often the ones who believed they already knew everything. They confused familiarity with understanding. Because they had heard about a topic, skimmed an article, or had a limited experience, they considered themselves absolute experts. This attitude reveals a dangerous form of foolishness, not the foolishness of low intelligence, but the foolishness of intellectual arrogance. Because the person who says, "I already know everything," isn't necessarily unintelligent in the traditional sense. They may actually be quite smart, but they have chosen to close their mind. They have chosen stagnation. They have chosen the comfortable illusion of mastery over the productive discomfort of doubt. Think about how many times you've encountered people like this. That coworker who never accepts a different suggestion because they already know how things work. That family member who refuses to learn anything new because they've always done it this way and it's worked. To that friend who interrupts every explanation with, I know, before you even finish speaking. These people are trapped in a mental prison of their own making. The most famous Socratic paradox is this: I know that I know nothing. With this seemingly contradictory statement, Socrates revealed a profound truth. He recognized the limits of his own knowledge, and that recognition made him wiser than those who believed they knew everything. Because acknowledging ignorance is the first step toward true wisdom. When you admit that you don't know, many doors open. You become curious, you ask questions, you genuinely listen. You are willing to change your mind when confronted with better evidence. You understand that knowledge is an infinite ocean, and you have only dipped your feet at the shore. This intellectual humility is not weakness. It is the greatest strength you can develop. Now reflect honestly. How often do you use variations of this first statement? How many times do you close your mind to new perspectives because you believe you already understand the subject? How many learning opportunities have you missed because your pride wouldn't allow you to recognize your own ignorance? The second phrase that identifies a foolish man, according to Socrates, is just as revealing, and perhaps even more dangerous. I don't need to examine this. I trust what I was told. Whoa! This statement represents a complete surrender of critical thinking, a renunciation of one's own capacity to reason, and the voluntary transfer of intellectual autonomy to other people. Socrates lived in a time when the sophists dominated the intellectual scene in Athens. These traveling teachers sold knowledge and rhetorical skill to anyone who could afford it. They taught their students how to argue convincingly, regardless of the truth. They could defend one position in the morning and the exact opposite in the afternoon, as long as they were paid to do so. Truth didn't matter. What mattered was persuasion, winning debates and manipulating opinions. Socrates saw this as a fundamental corruption of philosophy. For him, the goal was not to win arguments, but to discover the truth, and truth could only be reached through critical examination, constant questioning, and careful analysis of every belief and assumption. When someone simply accepts what they're told without questioning it, that person becomes an intellectual puppet, controlled by whoever is pulling the strings of the dominant narrative. Notice how this works in practice. You wake up in the morning and check your social media. Instantly, you're bombarded with information, opinions, and absolute claims about politics, health, money, relationships, and spirituality. Most people absorb this content without any critical filter. If something confirms their existing beliefs, they accept it as unquestionable truth. If it challenges those beliefs, they immediately dismiss it as misinformation or manipulation. But Socrates teaches us a third path, far more difficult and infinitely more valuable. Examine everything, question everything, accept nothing simply because an authority said it, because many people believe it, because it's always been that way, or because it feels convenient or comfortable. Submit every belief to the rigorous test of logic and evidence. This principle was at the heart of the Socratic method. When someone made a confident claim, Socrates didn't attack it directly. Instead, he asked questions that forced the person to examine the foundations of their own thinking. Why do you believe this? He would ask. What evidence supports it? Is this logically consistent with your other beliefs? Have you considered alternative perspectives? Most people couldn't answer these simple questions satisfactorily. They discovered that their deepest convictions were often just borrowed opinions, never examined, passively accepted from parents, teachers, religious leaders, influencers, or the dominant culture. This realization was unsettling, but also liberating. Because only when you recognize that your beliefs aren't truly your own can you begin the work of building a system of thought that genuinely belongs to you. Stoicism, a philosophy deeply influenced by Socratic thought, developed this idea even further. Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, wrote in his private meditations that we must examine every impression we receive, every thought that enters our mind, asking, is this true, or is it merely an opinion? Is it a fact, or an interpretation? This constant vigilance over our own thoughts is what keeps us free from external manipulation and from our own tendency towards self-deception. Epictetus, another great Stoic philosopher who began his life as a slave, taught that true freedom is not physical, but mental. You can be in chains, yet if your mind remains free to examine, question, and choose its own beliefs, you are freer than a king who passively accepts everything he's told. The person who says, I don't need to examine this, I trust what I was told, is a voluntary slave, regardless of social status or material wealth. Now consider how these two phrases work together to create complete and impenetrable foolishness. First, the person passively accepts information without examining it, building a castle of beliefs on a foundation of sand. Then, they declare that they already know everything about the subject, closing themselves off entirely to correction or further learning. It's a lethal combination, one that guarantees permanent intellectual stagnation. Do you know people like this? You probably know many. But here is the most important and most uncomfortable question. Have you ever been that person? Be honest. How many of your most fundamental beliefs have you truly examined? How many opinions do you defend passionately but have never seriously questioned? How often have you trusted a source simply because it confirmed what you already wanted to believe? If you've made it this far and are genuinely reflecting on these questions, you're already on the path of Socratic wisdom. Like this video now, because what comes next will challenge your assumptions about knowledge, truth, and the very nature of reality even more deeply. The tragedy of Socrates was not accidental. It was the inevitable result of a life devoted to challenging the comfortable certainties of powerful people. In 399 BC, Socrates was put on trial, accused of corrupting the youth and refusing to believe in the gods of the city. But these charges were merely pretexts. Socrates' true crime was forcing people to confront their own ignorance, and that is something most people simply cannot tolerate. During his trial, Socrates was given the chance to recant, to promise he would stop asking uncomfortable questions, to accept exile. Any of these options would have saved his life, but he chose something else. He chose death. Why? Because living without examining life was not worth it. His exact words, recorded by his student Plato, were, "The unexamined life is not worth living." Let that sentence sink deeply into your awareness. The unexamined life is not worth living. Socrates was not being dramatic or exaggerated. He was expressing a fundamental truth about what it means to be truly human. Animals live by instinct, reacting to stimuli without reflecting on the meaning of their actions. Human beings, however, have a unique capacity, the ability to examine their own lives, to question their thoughts, to evaluate their values. When we abandon this capacity, when we live on autopilot, accepting everything we are told and never questioning anything, we give up the most essential part of our humanity. Stoicism expanded this Socratic idea in a masterful way. Seneca, the Stoic philosopher and advisor to Emperor Nero, wrote extensively about the importance of daily self-reflection. He recommended that at the end of each day, before going to sleep, you should review your actions, your thoughts, and your emotional reactions. What did I do wrong today? What did I do right? What did I leave undone? Not to punish yourself, but to learn, to grow, to gradually become a better version of yourself. This practice of self-examination is the complete opposite of how most people live. Most people simply react to life. Something happens, and they respond automatically, based on patterns of thought and behavior they have never examined. They get angry because they have always gotten angry in those situations. They feel fear because they have always felt fear when facing those challenges. They repeat the same mistakes because they never stop to analyze why they made those mistakes in the first place. But there is another way to live, a Socratic way, a Stoic way. You can become the observer of your own life. You can create a space between stimulus and response, and in that space lies your freedom of choice. Viktor Frankl, the psychiatrist who survived Nazi concentration camps, discovered this truth under the most extreme circumstances. He realized that even when everything was taken from him, when he was starving, abused, surrounded by death, there was still one freedom no one could remove, the freedom to choose how to respond to his circumstances. That freedom exists only through examination. When you examine your thoughts, you realize that thoughts are just thoughts, not facts. When you examine your emotions, you realize that emotions are signals, not commands you must blindly obey. When you examine your beliefs, you realize that many of them were installed in your mind by other people, and you have the power to question them, reshape them, or reject them entirely. Now we arrive at an even deeper truth. The two phrases that reveal a foolish person are not merely about intellectual knowledge. They reveal a fundamental refusal to take responsibility for one's own life. When someone says, "I already know everything about this," they are refusing the responsibility to keep learning and growing. When someone says, "I don't need to examine this, I trust what I've been told," they are refusing the responsibility to think for themselves and make informed decisions. The Stoics understood that personal responsibility is the foundation of a virtuous life. Epictetus taught that we must divide everything into two categories: things that are within our control and things that are not. The only things truly within our control are our own thoughts, judgments, and choices. Everything else, including other people's opinions, external events, and even our own bodies to some extent, is outside our control. Wisdom lies in focusing all your energy on what you can control, your mind and your choices, and you can only control your mind if you examine it constantly. The person who does not examine their mind is controlled by it, a slave to automatic patterns, unchallenged beliefs, and reactive emotions. The person who examines their mind becomes its master, capable of consciously choosing their thoughts, interpretations, and responses. Marcus Aurelius, writing to himself on the battlefield, constantly reminded himself that external things do not have the power to disturb him. What disturbs us is our interpretation of those things. This is a revolutionary truth. You are not disturbed by events, but by the judgments you make about events, and you have the power to change those judgments, but only if you examine them first. Imagine how your life would change if you truly internalized this truth. Someone insults you. Instead of reacting automatically with anger, you pause and examine, why does this insult affect me? What belief about myself is being threatened? Is that belief actually true? Does this person have any real authority over my self-image? Through this examination, you realize that you can choose how to respond, or even choose not to give the insult any importance at all. The deep connection between Socratic thought and Stoicism reveals something extraordinary about human nature. Both philosophies recognize that the greatest battle you will face in life is not against external enemies or difficult circumstances, but against your own tendency toward illusion, self-deception, and the passive acceptance of comfortable falsehoods. This is the real war, and it takes place entirely within your own mind. When Socrates was sentenced to death, his friends planned his escape from prison. Everything was arranged. He could have easily fled to another city and continued living. But Socrates refused. Why? Because he had spent his entire life teaching that we must live according to our principles, that we must examine our actions through the lens of reason and justice. Escaping would have betrayed everything he stood for. It would have meant that his words were empty, that he lacked the courage to live by his own philosophy when the cost became too high. So he drank the hemlock, the poison that would kill him, surrounded by his friends and students, calm and composed until his final breath. This was not the death of a defeated man. It was the ultimate victory of someone who lived every word he taught. His death proved that he truly believed an unexamined life is not worth living, and that living in accordance with truth and virtue matters more than physical survival itself. This final scene in Socrates' life became one of the most powerful moments in the history of philosophy. Why? Because it revealed something we all need to understand. Your beliefs only have value if you are willing to live by them, even when it's costly. How many people say they value truth, yet lie when it's convenient? How many claim to value courage, but retreat at the first sign of difficulty? How many praise integrity, yet compromise their principles for small advantages? Stoicism took this Socratic lesson and transformed it into a practical system for living. The Stoics understood that knowing what is right is not enough. You must constantly train yourself to act in accordance with what is right, especially when it's hard. They developed mental exercises, daily practices, and specific methods to strengthen the will and align actions with values. One of these exercises is negative visualization. Marcus Aurelius practiced it daily. He imagined losing everything he had: his power, his wealth, his family, his health, even his life. Why do something that seems so morbid? Because when you mentally prepare for the worst, two things happen. First, you appreciate what you have now, realizing that everything is temporary and fragile. Second, when real difficulties arrive, you are not caught off guard. You have already trained your mind to respond with calm rather than panic. But there is something even deeper here. When you regularly examine your beliefs and values, when you question your own motivations, you begin to uncover layers of self-deception you didn't even know existed. You discover that many of your seemingly noble actions are driven by disguised pride. You realize that many of your rational opinions are simply emotional rationalizations. You recognize that what you once called love may be manipulation, and what you called trust may be fear of looking more closely. This process of discovery is painful. It is far more comfortable to live on the surface, to never look too deeply, to accept your own stories about who you are and why you do what you do. But this shallow life is exactly what Socrates meant when he said that an unexamined life is not worth living. You can spend decades busy, distracted and entertained, yet never truly alive, never fully aware, never genuinely free. Real freedom begins when you stop running from yourself, when you have the courage to look honestly at your own thoughts, including the ugly and uncomfortable ones. When you examine your deepest motivations, including those you would rather not admit. When you question your most fundamental beliefs, including those that form the foundation of your identity. Seneca wrote that we should become like the ancient gladiators who, before entering the arena, would say, "I am prepared." Not prepared in the sense of having all the answers, but prepared in the sense of having examined oneself so deeply that no external circumstance can destroy your inner core. You can lose everything and still keep your integrity. You can face death and remain calm. You can be slandered and not lose your dignity, because your true strength depends on nothing external. Now consider how the two phrases of foolishness completely block this kind of growth. "I already know everything about this" traps you inside a limited version of yourself, preventing any real development. "I don't need to examine this. I trust what I've been told" keeps you in intellectual childhood, always dependent on others to think for you. And here is the devastating truth most people never confront. These phrases don't just apply to external topics, they apply to self-knowledge itself. How many people live believing they fully know themselves? I know who I am. I know my limits. I understand my motivations. This is the most dangerous form of self-deception, because you are infinitely more complex, contradictory, and mysterious than any simplified image you've created of yourself. And how many people simply accept what others have told them about who they are? My parents said I'm bad at math. My teacher said I'm not creative. My friends said I'm too shy. You accepted these labels and built your entire life around them, never examining whether they were true, never testing your limits, never questioning whether they were just the narrow opinions of people who had never examined themselves either. What makes Socrates' legacy truly immortal is not that he had all the answers. In fact, he repeatedly claimed that he had no definitive answers at all. What made him extraordinary was his absolute refusal to accept easy, unexamined explanations. He lived in a permanent state of inquiry, of questioning, of searching for truth, and this search was not an intellectual hobby. It was the very essence of his existence. The Stoics adopted this posture and transformed it into something even more practical. They recognized that philosophy is not just abstract theory discussed in academies. It is a survival tool, a user's manual for navigating the brutal complexity of human existence. Marcus Aurelius did not write his meditations for publication. They were personal reminders, instructions he gave himself on how to remain centered amid the chaos of ruling an empire, leading armies, facing plagues, and enduring betrayal. One of the most powerful Stoic practices is what they called the view from above. Imagine lifting yourself above your life, seeing it from an ever greater distance. First, you see your room, then your house, then your city, your country, the continent, the entire planet, the solar system, the galaxy. Suddenly your daily concerns shrink. That argument that drained your energy, that insult that ruined your day, that ambition dominating your thoughts, all of it becomes infinitesimally small when seen from a cosmic perspective. But this practice is not about minimizing your life or making it meaningless. Quite the opposite. It is about gaining clarity on what truly matters. When you see the brevity of human life against the scale of cosmic time, when you realize that you and everyone you know will be gone in a few decades, this should not lead to nihilism. It should create urgency, the urgency to live according to your deepest values now, to stop wasting precious time on trivialities and to focus on what is genuinely important. And what is genuinely important, Socrates and the Stoics agreed. The cultivation of virtue, the development of character, the practice of wisdom, justice, courage, and self-control, not as abstract concepts, but as living qualities you express in every decision, every interaction, every moment of your life. But here is the challenge. How do you cultivate virtue? How do you develop character? Only through constant self-examination. You must observe your actions, analyze your motivations, question your impulses. When you act out of anger, you need to ask, why am I angry? Is this anger justified? Am I reacting to reality or to my interpretation of reality? Is there a wiser way to respond? Epictetus, who rose from slavery to become one of the most respected philosophers in Rome, taught that we must become vigilant guardians of our impressions. Every time something happens, you receive an impression, an initial reaction. Most people act immediately on that first impression, but Epictetus teaches us to pause, to examine the impression, to ask whether it is accurate, and to consciously choose how to respond. Imagine the power of this practice. Someone criticizes you. Your immediate impression is to feel offended, to strike back, but you pause. You examine it. Is there truth in this criticism? Can I learn something from it? If there is no truth, why should I care about this person's mistaken opinion? Does my intrinsic worth depend on other people's approval? Through this brief but deep examination, you transform a moment that could have produced conflict and suffering into an opportunity for growth and inner peace. Now consider how the two phrases of stupidity completely block this process. If you already know everything, there is nothing to examine. If you simply trust what you've been told, there is no need to question your impressions. You become an automaton, reacting mechanically to life's stimuli, never exercising the unique capacity that separates you from animals, the ability to consciously choose your responses based on reason and wisdom. And there is more. A person who lives without self-examination does not harm only themselves, they harm everyone around them. Without self-knowledge, without confronting their own shadows, they project their inner darkness onto others. Without questioning their beliefs, they try to impose those beliefs on everyone else. Without examining their motivations, they manipulate others unconsciously, acting from needs and fears they don't even recognize within themselves. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychologist who developed profound insights into the human psyche, said something that perfectly echoes Socratic and Stoic thought. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. This sentence captures exactly what Socrates was trying to teach. Your automatic reactions, your unexamined thought patterns, your inherited and never questioned beliefs, all of this operates beneath your awareness, controlling your life while you believe you are in charge. Socratic examination is the process of bringing the unconscious into the light of consciousness. It is uncomfortable because you discover aspects of yourself you would rather not see. You realize you are more cowardly than you thought, more proud than you admitted, more driven by fear than you would like to acknowledge. But this discovery, painful as it may be, is liberating, because you can only change what you can see. What remains hidden continues to control you. Seneca practiced a powerful nightly exercise. Before going to sleep, he mentally reviewed his entire day, examining every interaction, every decision, every emotional reaction. What could I have done better? Where did I act from emotion instead of reason? Where did I compromise my principles? Where did I miss an opportunity to practice virtue? Not to torture himself with guilt, but to learn, to grow, to gradually become the person he aspired to be. Now, we arrive at the deepest revelation, the one I promised from the very beginning. The truth Socrates paid for with his life, and the truth the Stoics turned into the foundation of an entire philosophy of living. It is this: you are not your beliefs, you are not your emotions, you are not your thoughts. You are the awareness that observes all of them. And when you truly understand this, when you live it moment by moment, you become genuinely free. This is why self-examination is so crucial. When you examine a thought, there is necessarily a separation. There is the thought being examined, and there is you, the one doing the examining. You cannot be the thought if you are observing it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." But how do you gain power over your mind? First, by becoming aware of it through constant examination. The two statements of foolishness represent a refusal to make this essential separation. When you say, "I already know everything about this," you have completely identified yourself with your current beliefs. There is no space between you and them. You will defend those beliefs as fiercely as you would defend your own life, because you have confused your beliefs with your identity. When you say, "I don't need to examine this. I trust what I was told," you have allowed other people to program your mind without even realizing that you are running on someone else's mental software. Socratic and Stoic wisdom offer a radical alternative. Become the observer. Observe your thoughts without identifying with them. Observe your emotions without being ruled by them. Observe your beliefs without being imprisoned by them. This position of the conscious witness is your true identity. Everything else is temporary, changeable, and open to revision and growth. Epictetus used a powerful metaphor. He said that you are like an actor in a play. You do not choose the role you are given, the circumstances you are born into, or the challenges you face. But you completely choose how you play that role. You can play it with excellence or mediocrity, with integrity or betrayal of your values, with awareness or on autopilot. Greatness is not found in the role you were assigned, but in how you perform it. And you can only play your role consciously if you are constantly examining your actions, your motivations, and your thoughts. Without examination, you are not acting. You are merely reacting. You are following scripts written by others, living a life that was never truly your own. Socrates understood this. That is why he chose death rather than abandoning the practice of questioning. Because living without examination, living on autopilot, reacting without awareness, is not truly living. It is merely biological existence, while remaining spiritually and intellectually asleep. And for a man like Socrates, that empty existence was worse than death. The Stoics carried this truth forward and showed that it can be lived even under the most extreme circumstances. Marcus Aurelius ruled a declining empire, faced constant wars, lost children, and endured chronic illness. Yet through daily reflection and self-examination, he kept his inner center intact. Epictetus was born a slave, suffered physical abuse that left him permanently disabled. But by examining and controlling the only thing within his power, his own mind, he achieved a freedom his masters never knew. So here is the final challenge for you. From this moment on, commit to constant examination. When you catch yourself saying, "I already know everything about this," stop. Ask yourself, do I really know? Have I examined this belief carefully? Am I open to new perspectives? When you notice yourself accepting something simply because someone else said it, pause. Ask, why do I believe this? What is the evidence? Is this consistent with my values and my understanding of the world? Make examination a daily practice. At the end of each day, take a few minutes to review your actions. Where did you act in alignment with your highest values? Where did you compromise them? Where did you react emotionally instead of responding rationally? Where did you miss opportunities for growth because you were operating on autopilot? This is not a project for a few days or weeks. It is the work of a lifetime, but it is the work that makes life worth living. Every day of honest examination is a day of real progress. Every moment in which you consciously choose your response instead of reacting automatically is a moment of true freedom. And remember, you do not need to be perfect. None of the great philosophers were. Socrates had flaws. The Stoics made mistakes. But they kept examining, kept trying, kept growing. The goal is not to eliminate all errors, but to live consciously, to die without regrets, knowing that you truly lived your life instead of merely watching it pass by. If you've watched this far, leave a comment saying, "I will examine my life." This simple public commitment could be the catalyst for the deepest transformation you have ever experienced. Subscribe to the channel now, because we will continue exploring these ancient teachings that have the power to completely transform your existence. On the end screen, you'll find 2 essential videos that go even deeper into this journey of self-knowledge and Stoic wisdom. Don't stop here. True wisdom is waiting for you. The examined life begins now. The choice, as always, is yours. Will you continue living on autopilot, repeating the 2 statements of foolishness? Or will you wake up to a life of awareness, examination, and true freedom? Socrates gave his life for this truth. The Stoics devoted their lives to living it. Now it's your turn to decide. An unexamined life is not worth living, but a life examined, a life lived with full awareness, is the only life truly worth living. Start today. Examine everything, question everything, and discover who you really are beyond all thoughts, beliefs, and conditioning. This is the most important journey you will ever take.